All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Think about any nation in the world, a sovereign state. No matter where you are, we all tend to accept a pretty basic fundamental premise about how a country's economy operates, right? The standard model we all learn is simple. Your country prints its own currency. You've got a central bank, and that bank actively sets your interest rates.
And because it has those fundamental tools ready to go, it basically runs its own economy. It pulls the levers, it balances the scales.
So in theory, it completely controls its money. This is literally the absolute bedrock of modern economics. You control your currency, you control your destiny.
But what if it doesn't?
Because in a lot of countries today, from Argentina to Lebanon, the most important currency driving the real economy isn't the one printed at home at all. It's the US dollar.
We call this the dollarization trap. And honestly, it usually has a completely harmless start. People just start exchanging their local cash for dollars to protect their families from massive inflation. You'll literally see everyday street vendors listing prices in US dollars just to survive the week. Even governments start borrowing in dollars because international lenders absolutely demand it. It starts out as an entirely rational survival strategy.
But slowly, without any big official declaration, the dollar functionally becomes the real economy. Now think about what that actually means for a second. It creates this massive external vulnerability. If your economy relies on a currency you don't control, your stability is completely dictated by decisions made thousands of miles away. Like, if US interest rates go up in Washington, capital immediately flees your country. If the dollar strengthens globally, your local debt suddenly becomes drastically more expensive. When global investors panic, your entire economy contracts.
And here is the truly terrifying part about all this. There is absolutely nothing your central bank can do about it. Because simply printing more local currency to bail yourself out, that doesn't fix the problem.
Actually, it just makes things worse. It kicks off this merciless loop. The central bank prints more money, which directly leads to higher inflation, which causes a sharp downward trend in the local currency. And that drop just makes even more people flee to dollars. So demand for the dollar spikes, the local currency drops even further, and the trap just rapidly, mercilessly tightens.
Let's make this a bit more concrete. I want to step away from the macroeconomic theory for a minute and look at exactly how this traps a nation in real time.
Imagine a government needs to fund basic stuff, infrastructure, like roads or hospitals. But investors don't trust the local currency, so the government has to borrow in dollars. And that works perfectly until the local currency weakens. If you look at countries like Nigeria or Argentina, you see this happen. Virtually overnight, that exact same debt becomes massively harder to repay, simply because the exchange rate collapsed. So the government is forced to cut spending, raise taxes, or print more money, which, you guessed it, just weakens the currency further, making the debt even heavier. It's just an inescapable, punishing cycle.
This structural reality explains so much of what we see globally right now. When you look at developing nations heavily reliant on the dollar, you consistently see these recurring symptoms: sudden currency crises, massive inflation spikes, and repeated, really agonizing debt restructurings. It's so vital to understand from this explainer that these crises happen not because these countries are just inherently reckless with their money, but because they are structurally constrained by this very system.
But now here's the deeper problem: loss of monetary sovereignty. I really want you to take a moment to process this definition. It is the complete inability of a central bank to control inflation, to stabilize recessions, or to act as a lender of last resort, entirely due to a lack of local trust. The systemic loss we're talking about here is just profound.
This kind of warps the very fabric of governance. Because people fundamentally don't trust the local system, even good policy has an incredibly limited impact. The central bank tries its hardest to do the right thing, but the market just ignores it. And on the flip side, bad policy has exponentially amplified consequences, because all those traditional economic guardrails, they're completely gone.
So you see, dollarization doesn't just replace other systemic traps, it actually strengthens all of them. A debt trap is infinitely worse when you owe that debt in dollars. Global dependency deepens drastically when you realize that literally 80 to 90% of global trade is invoiced in US dollars. Elite capture is far easier to achieve when your financial systems are opaque and unstable. And fragility is basically guaranteed when every single economic shock your country feels comes from the outside.
Now here's the really uncomfortable truth. Countries don't just choose dollarization freely. In the short term, it absolutely works. It's a survival strategy to protect everyday savings and stabilize prices when things look dire. But in the long term, it becomes a structural trap. It shifts control completely away from domestic institutions and hands it directly over to global financial forces. What begins as a desperately needed solution inevitably becomes a cage.
And once that shift happens, escaping it is extraordinarily rare. Why? Because restoring trust in a currency once it's completely gone is vastly harder than losing it in the first place.
Ultimately, what we're looking at isn't just some simple failure of domestic policy. It is a total systemic takeover where money itself is no longer fully yours.
We really have to stop looking at these vulnerabilities as separate, isolated issues. It's one system, one structure, one reality. All of these economic traps are deeply, intricately connected to each other, making escape nearly impossible. Which leaves us with this one lingering reality to consider. When a country loses control over its money, does it lose control over its future?